Welcome, everybody, to DAT Poker Podcast, episode 89. It is December 5th, 2020. I'm your host, A. Schwartz, alongside producer extraordinaire Russ P. Coltrane.
We are very unprofessional. And
Rich Ryan, that's old school Rich Ryan drop. I like it. Terrence Chan in Kelowna. T, how are you, sir?
Hello. I'm doing well. Just trying to stay warm. Daniel, is that a lover and a fighter t-shirt? That's what that is? Is that like a salt and pepper reference?
It is a Contender's Clothing, which you guys, you still use freaking promo code KidPoker20 or whatever to get 20% off. I don't know, but I don't even know, whatever. But I did want to say this episode should be brought to us by ketchup chips.
Oh, yes.
Chips for ketchup flavored chips that are not available in the United States of America. But thanks to our co-host here, Mr. Adam Schwartz, who put together the most ridiculously huge care package from Canada with all this stuff that I didn't even remember, like those Halloween candies that you get only in Canada that have like the paper that looks like ridiculous. And so far, so good. The wife is on the wagon wheel. She had those and was loving it. I'm going to dig into some dill pickle chips tonight, I think. Luckily, I don't have any weight bets, and I'm in a bulk phase, so let's bring it on.
They don't have dill pickle chips either? Like, I don't understand. The United States is like the king of processed food and junk food, and they haven't figured out ketchup chips and dill chips yet?
There's so many things they haven't gotten, right? But those ones seem like the obvious. All dressed Ruffles, like that's not a thing here. They got Smarties in Canada. We got M&M's here. A whole bunch of stuff. And of course,
Smarties.
Oh, I didn't think I liked Tim Hortons coffee. I didn't think I liked it. Yeah. And then Adam sent me this dark roast, and I love it. It's really, really good. I think I had the other one, which was meh. But this is really.
You started drinking coffee like during this or the last World Series, right? I remember like the 2019 World Series. I remember you'd said like I've never drank coffee before. Yeah, I'm gonna start drinking coffee so I can make late nights. And now you're like a coffee snob.
Well, listen, I'm not a snob. I drink it. But I mean, like, I felt like everyone else is using performance-enhancing drugs in these poker games. That why should I deprive myself of caffeine if it's totally legal within the rules? And so that's what we're doing. I mean, in my match with Doug, we did have to stipulate whether or not specific aids like caffeine and coffee would be allowed. And we both agreed that yes, you are able to consume coffee before, during, and after the match.
Oh, is there anything on the banned list that you guys aren't allowed to take?
Well, I think coffee was the one that came up, but I don't know if there's any sort of like limitless type drugs that, like, I don't know, Adderall or whatever. I don't take anything, but I'm just
because I mean that's not uncommon in the poker world. A lot of these things, a lot of people like psilocybin. I remember Adderall was like a big thing maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, and a lot of the ADHD medications were really big 7 or 8 years ago. But yeah, I would like this is the kind of thing, like, you've gone through this heads up match and all this negotiations. It's not even something I even would have ever crossed my radar to do a no PED test. But I mean, it's like whatever. It's like poker, right? It almost doesn't matter nearly as much as like a sport.
Well, Crispy Crunch would have been on that list for sure.
Coffee Crisp.
So some of that brought you back to your childhood, Daniel. Some of the candies.
Unbelievable, yeah. It was really cool to open it up because it was like a package of all this stuff. Coffee Crisps, I remember being as a kid really like that. The Mr. Big chocolate bars, the Arrow, all that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
So yeah, definitely brought it back. Appreciate it.
No problem. Cool. All right, you mentioned it. Your match with Doug Polk, it continues. You guys are about 7,200 hands through. Of course, you have the option to opt out after 12.5, and it can go as long as 25,000 or even past, I guess, depending on how everything's going. You are currently down 518K, which is 11 buy-ins or 12 buy-ins or something. So it's been interesting, right? And I've watched a whole bunch of these sessions, and I think you're through 15 sessions by now. And the runs that you each are going on are interesting to watch. The variance obviously is large, and heads up, no limit hold'em. And Doug went on a pretty crazy run, through, I think he was down 155,000. Through 7 sessions, and then 8 through 12, he ripped off 4 wins, and all of a sudden turned that into being up 600K. The last 3 sessions, you've been the victor, but smaller amounts, and you are now down again 518K through 7,200 hands. So Well, before we go on and talk about things like all NEV and how you think you're running and how you're playing, just sort of some general 30,000 feet of observations down here. How do you think it's going so far?
Yeah, so just a slight correction. The number is actually 514 in terms of what I'm on. We've played 7,469 hands. So we've got about 5,000 more before decision point. And I think the biggest thing that it's fun, it's fascinating, and me and Doug discuss it, like how people like overreact to results from a session where like the cards often dictate like what's going to happen. We played a cooler hand, which we can discuss, where I had aces against kings and we were 300 big blinds deep. And it's like, if he had aces, he would have won that money. If I had the aces, I'm going to win that money. So there's a lot of situations that come up like that. So really, the barometer for skill is like the trench wars, the smaller pots, like who's winning, a little bit of like the red line, as you call it, hands without showdown, who's winning the battle in that regard. Because ultimately, I know it sounds like a lot of hands, 25,000 hands, but it really isn't. Ultimately, and this was my hope, was that the deciding factor in the match would be variance, right? Over 25,000 hands. We ran some sims, right? Where you take, let's say, two totally break-even players. Say you and Terrence are dead break-even, right? And you guys play 10 million hands, let's say, right? There's a standard deviation there where one player will be stuck 600 buy-ins. 600 buy-ins, right? So seeing swings of like, we expected there to be $1 million swings, right? It's actually been pretty tame this week. As you said, each and every one of the 3 sessions this week, I got buried. Like first hour, I just got unlucky in some spots here and there, whatever. And I was actually, it was good to claw out in all 3. And I didn't win a lot this week. I won like 2 buy-ins total. But as you mentioned, a little bit about all in EV. Like I got Jackson against Ace King. I got a few others. And I think if you look at the deficit right now, more than half of it just comes from all in EV. So for those who don't understand what that means, obviously there's a lot of different things you can point to in terms of what determine luck. But all in EV is pure. Like, in this one area, when all the money goes in, there's no more decisions to make. So each player has a certain amount of equity. Well, Doug is running about $260,000 above all in EV expectation. He's beaten my like jacks with 10s. He beat me with another hand where I had like queens against 8s. He won the flips, stuff like that. So if that were to break even right now, you're looking at a match that's about 240, 250K. And I feel like I'm getting better fast. Like in the last week or so, I've introduced new sizes. I talked a little bit about when you learn poker, right? I think one of the easiest way to learn poker is like, okay, find situations where you either bet or you check, and you bet the same amount every time, right? It's an easy way to learn. Master those 2 things. Now you go, okay, well here we can do this, we can do this. So when I look back at the first week or 2 of the match, and I think of like, what I was doing, because it's all I was capable of really on 4 weeks training, right? I had to do something, and my coaches did a good job, I think, of implementing this somewhat more simplistic format until I mastered it. And then they felt like, all right, you are ready to, play ultimate, added sizes. Because the danger is this, right? So I was using a 20 and a 75 for most of my plays. If I start using a 1.5x pot for, different sizes, but I'm misusing it, that could actually be worse. That actually is worse than not using it at all, right? But the problem with not using it at all is you are giving away EV in certain situations because it's just optimal. So it's been fun. I feel really good. Our review sessions, our hand review sessions are much shorter because there's a lot less mistakes that I'm making. I've been doing hand reviews on on my YouTube channel, and I find those to be really fun because I did one drunk and I do some silly ones, and it's just funny to me because I read some comments, people like, dude, is that how he really thinks about hands? Like literally my commentary is something like this. It's like, you know what? Fuck, I'm going to raise this because fuck that guy. Like that's not quite how I think about poker, but I can't.
It was for like up until about 2005.
Yeah, seriously.
Fuck this guy, I'm raising.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the sizing thing though, because the fact that you did bring out the different sizing, you mentioned that you have this like learning curve, and you were starting from a place where you weren't an expert at no limit hold'em, so you kept it to just those couple sizes. Introducing the extra sizes is part of that reason to make it harder for Doug to study, in that, I mean, if he knows you're only going to use 2 sizes, he can study against that and see like, okay, what are these responses? Whereas if you have like 4 or 5 sizes, it makes his study much more difficult because he doesn't know which one you're gonna whip out at any given point in time.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it's easy. That's not the main driver behind it. The main driver is just like picking up, EV in spots where you should be betting. And I think what's interesting throughout the match, and if you look at how he played in the early going, like I think we've both learned from each other's camps. Like there's some sizing that he was not using in spots where he should, like the 20% bet. For example, it's pretty common on a monotone board. Like if it comes, king, jack, 4 of spades, that is a spot where actually the solver kind of prefers a small bet, like 20%, because it's a monotone board, which means you have, a smaller number of value combos that are really, really strong. So typically on spots like that, you would use a much smaller size. So he wasn't doing that. He saw me doing it. I think he went in the lab and was like, oh, okay, this 20 is good. We've done the same thing. I noticed some sizes that he was using in certain spots, and, we crunched it or we looked at it and we're like, that's really, really good. And so we started incorporating some of those as well. It's been good. But that's been the fun part, is really learning. Like I feel really good now. Like I feel like I'm very good at the game. I'm not suggesting I'm better than he is, but I definitely feel like if I can continue to battle and keep my head in it. And that's what the one thing I say I'm most proud of this week was, starting off so badly in each session after getting bonks crushed for like 8 buy-ins in a ridiculous freaking session where he ran above, like he was hanging out by the sun. Just to be able to like keep my head in it and come back after, being stuck in those sessions, that felt good. So next week we are going to put in, I think, a 4-session week, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then we've got the main event of the World Series of Poker. He's got some birthdays. We've got some Christmas. So it may be a little bit of a break from the match for about a week or two.
How much better of a player do you think you are now? Even just through this few, only 7,000 hands, do you find yourself like, oh my God, I'm way better than I am than when I started?
Oh my God. Like when I think back, like when I started, I couldn't be like a guy who plays 5 cent, 10 cent. Like I really could not win. Because what they did was, think of like karate. It's almost like, it reminds me of Karate Kid Miyagi style, where all the things I've known about poker for 20 years, let's get rid of all of it. Okay? Let's say you have all these different weapons you can use in a fight, right? And Terrence, I say, okay, you can't use your legs, can't use anything, but just do a jab. That's it. That's all you have to win a fight. You're not going to win this fucking fight in an MMA, right? But you get so good at this jab that you've mastered the jab. And you're like, all right, now we're going to give you a kick. So now you have a kick. You still can't win with just a kick. So I couldn't win at all in the early going. But once you sort of put the pieces together and build out the game, you realize how important it was to just get to add a fundamental. Because if you try to learn all these complicated concepts at the same time, you're not going to succeed. You got to master one, and I did. There's specific things that they were very impressed with how quickly I did. Was able to grasp these concepts and move on to the next.
So 2 things, if you're trying to back out and get to the best poker player in this, if that's a goal, the 2 things you want to back out, and we talked about it earlier, is all in EV. And the other thing you want to back out or try and back out that's impossible, but card distribution, right? So, if you could somehow magically back those 2 things out and come to, oh, well, this is the real win rate that, Doug or you should have in this spot. So I know, early on they thought, or, Doug's camp, I guess, thought that you were running really good and the card distribution was in your favor. But then, things certainly turned. And I think Doug even talked about the fact that he's hitting literally everything and for those 4 sessions or whatever it was. I'm wondering, from your point of view, how you feel like the card distribution is at this point.
See, that's the funniest thing, right? Imagine people who don't see the whole cards claiming that one person is getting better card distribution when they have no fucking clue what both players are getting in terms of card distribution. Yeah. It's a total random guess. Like, I've gotten aces a lot. Haven't gotten a lot of action until the last session. But overall, like, I feel like in most spots, I've run pretty unlucky. There's been a lot of flush over flushes, which is crazy in this format where, I've had the king high flush way too many times against his ace high flush or stuff like that. Or a couple times where I had the flush, and he had a flush, the board ran out, like it paired the board and the 4th frickin' of suit came out, which happened to him recently. Because there's another hand where I flop, it comes 10, 8, 7 of spades. I have king deuce of spades. He has ace 4 of spades. Check raises, turns a 10, rivers a 7. So I got lucky there, right? But a lot of it has to, like, there's a lot of, like, when you factor in luck, runouts matter. So, for example, the aces versus kings against him. First of all, I 4-bet the aces. He chose not to 5-bet the kings.
But you're playing 300 big blinds. I think you were both more than 300 big blinds deep, right?
This was by far the deepest we've been playing, 300 big blinds. So this was a spot where I 4-bet. He chose to not 5-bet the kings, which he does at a certain frequency. And one of the things he does for his frequencies is he does what we call rolling it. So basically he clicks his random number generator, And whatever that says, that's what he does. So this time, I guess he rolled, a call. And now the board runs out like 10-5-4. He checks. I make a standard bet in 4-bet pots, which is typically smaller, right? About 20% pot. He calls. The turn is a 7. He checks. I check back. And a lot of people might be like, well, why did you check aces? Actually, if you run it in a solver, the solver will tell you that is a pure check. There's no frequency of like sometimes bet aces. You basically always check aces on that turn.
Wow.
Yeah, because when you're this deep, right? So when you punch in information into a solver, obviously if you're 30 big blinds deep, it will tell you just to go all in or whatever. But in this case, I check back. The river's a 10, pairs the 10, which is not an ideal card because there is a wide range of like 10s in his range, like 10 jack suited, 10 queen suited, king 10, 9-10 suited, ace 10 suited, those types of hands. So from that perspective, he bets pot. I'm just calling. So that, if the board runs like a deuce on the river, maybe we get it all if he 5-bets, but like little things like that. There's so much luck, so much variance. But in the end, like I just want to make it competitive, and I know that I have, and I think it's only going to be more and more so down the stretch.
Kind of a side note on that aces on the 10-7-5-4. It's a really interesting thing because I was just sort of thinking through that in my head, but it makes perfect sense because when you are the pre-flop 4-better, you are almost never nutted on the 10-7-5-4. So if you're very deep, it's very important to threaten the nuts, and you just don't have.
Actually, that's not quite true. If you look at the spread of 6-8s in that spot, it's pretty even. In fact, I think I may have. Well, it's pretty close to even. I would say maybe he has a few more 6-8s than I do.
Yeah, like there's 6-8s, but like he's also he's got a little more sets, and I think that's kind of the problem with that. But it's an interesting spot because it's a spot that you knew that you played correctly. Is this a spot that you think you would have necessarily played correctly 300 big blinds deep before going into all this study? Because it's the kind of thing where like intuitively, Adam said like, wow, when you use like a pure check back or a pure check rather, that it's like it's not immediately obvious until you really start to get into the weeds with the study.
Yeah, Mike Matiso said I could have won more. So when he said that, I was like, what? Okay, let me double check because if he says I could have got more, then I have to make sure that I played it right. There was one other aces hand that we might as well bring up because I had it twice and I finally got some action on it where I raised with the ace. Oh, he opens the button. I 3-bet aces. He 4-bets. And now this is an interesting spot because aces is one of the hands that you kind of want to have in your calling range with 4-bets because the problem with if you don't, like if you're always 5-betting aces, now your hand becomes kind of face up because calling a 4-bet, you're going to have too many hands in that like queen jack suited, 10 jack suited type range, pocket 7s, pocket 8s type thing. So it's very easy to play against that, right? So having aces is a very good trap hand to have there. So then I, of course, call the 4-bet, and the flop is perfect. Jack 2's deuce, deuce. I check. He bets small. Again, this is sort of standard in 4-bet pots. Like the hand doesn't really start till turn in a lot of ways. And then the turn is a 3. I check, of course. He checks. And the interesting decision for me came on the river because the river was a queen, right? So intuitively, what would you do there if you're out of position and there's 100 big blinds left? Would you bet or would you check?
Bet, try and get value from queen, but he's going to bet a queen, I guess, if you check to him. Yeah, not sure.
You, Terrence?
I spaced out a bit. We've got a board of jack, deuce, deuce.
3. So the board, so it was 4-bet pot.
Yeah.
I check call with aces on jack, deuce, deuce. Turn is a 3. Check, check. River is a queen, and it's on you.
If we're deep, like
100 big blinds left, yeah.
Yeah,
you check and he's got a queen, he's betting it, right?
Yeah, there's no real strong reason to believe that he has a queen. I mean, I think it's probably a check for some balance. It's probably like an overbet a decent amount of time.
Okay, so this is interesting because Adam's onto something there too. But like, you got to figure this, right? He has bluffs in his 4-bet range, right? So if he is bluffing, that queen is a really great card for him to bluff at. If you go ahead and take the initiative, he can't bluff anymore, right? So as Adam said, if he has a queen, he will bet for value, and he also bets all of his bluffs, right? If I go all in first, I shut out his bluffs and, make sure I get called by the queen. But anyway, as it turned out, I checked and he jammed all in with king 4 spades. So I was able to win a nice pop by setting the trap there. But,
I just want to go back to that aces versus kings hand when we were talking and you guys were saying that, you're polarized away from the nuts and, and sets and stuff. And I'm wondering, then is your four betting range too tight if you can't rep those hands? Is it worthwhile to expand your four bet range to include some
Well,
of
it's
those?
not just about 6-8 because Daniel pointed out you will have 6-8s in your distribution. I just think it's more likely that your opponent probably has more if you take the combination of all the sets and the 6-8s, the pre-flop guy who called the four bet is more likely to have those things in his distribution than the guy who four bets himself.
So often when you're playing a hand on a turn, you need to think about not just the hand that you have, but how does your range play in this spot, right? You can't just be like, oh, I have aces this time, I'll bet, unless you plan on actually doing that with all the other hands in your range as well. So the big danger there is because we're so deep, 300 big blinds deep, if I bet that turn and it's 10, 4, 5, 7, do you really feel great about getting check raised on this turn ever? Like, you may actually find yourself check raising and having to fold, either to the turn bet or the river bet. So the aces is a really good hand to check back in that spot because it opens the door for him to bluff rivers. It opens the door. Like, he probably does. It's not like you're giving away a ton of free outs unless he has specifically sixes or eights. But hands like sixes or eights could really put it to you with the check raise on the turn with outs, right? So in general, when you're playing that deep, you think a little more tournament style, kind of, where you're like, all right, I don't necessarily want to freaking get it in for 300 big blinds with a fucking pair. You know what I mean?
So when he doesn't five bet pre in that spot, I mean, there's almost no board that you're gonna get a 300 big blinds in with one pair, then, right?
Well, I mean, very unlikely unless it comes like deuce 3 or deuce.
Yeah, sorry, an unpaired board. And there's no unpaired board that you're not gonna really ever get it in then.
Well, listen, if it comes deuce 3-8, deuce 3-9, those
not many. Yeah.
Because I mean, deuces or threes. I mean, I guess you can call four bets, but it's rare that you really want to. But I guess to that deep, maybe you can play more hands. Well, again, that's actually been the fun thing. We played so much more deep this week that I realized that's an area that I really need to work on and study more because everything changes. The sizings change, the ranges that you're supposed to defend with change. Like, everything changes when you're playing 200, 300 big blinds deep. Playing 100 big blinds deep, you're like, okay, you put in 27 big blinds before the flop or something, 54 in there. You're like, all right, well, shit, I got something, right? Whereas, when you're 300 big blinds deep, you have to think more carefully.
All right. So, quickly, can you quit when you get deep and start again with a new stack or 100 big blind stack, or no? Is that a thing? I can't remember.
We decided we're going to play at least 2-hour sessions. At least that's what I agreed to. And then after that, can quit whenever I feel. If I felt like that's just too deep, I could quit. But I was enjoying it. I mean, I probably shouldn't be playing deep because he has more experience there. So I'd probably be better off not doing that. But I kind of like it. I kind of enjoy it. So I stick with it.
I was curious what the pain threshold is, or what do they call that? The threshold of when are you do you think you'll cut it off at 12-5 if you're losing, or are you going to go through the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it depends on what we look like. But right now, I mean, I have no intention of quitting at 12-5 right now, right? I'm hoping for a nice run like he had where he won 8 buy-ins in a session. I'll get that, win some all-in pots, get the all-in EV, back in action. And I feel like, there's incentive for me because I do have some side bets that I made thanks to Bill Perkins, where I have myself at like 10-1 and 5-1 to win them. So that makes it worthwhile to go ahead and continue regardless.
Yeah. And I mean, it's still close. It's a big dollar amount, but it's only 11 buy-ins or whatever.
That's the thing people don't realize is like, you can play sessions where you win or lose 12 buy-ins. It happens. And, I expect there to be several lead changes before it's over. I know people might be like, oh, you'll never get the lead again. I think that I believe there'll be several by the time we're done 25,000 hands.
So Doug, on his YouTube channel, he had the last match, or he did the last session with cards kind of covered. He ended up scrolling over his hand a bunch of times, and you could see his hands and hand histories and stuff. But it was pretty interesting to see some of his thought processes. He was talking a little bit about his hands. He wasn't being overly he wasn't being overly talkative, but he certainly talked about some of the spots. It was good to watch. Any thoughts on doing something like that, Daniel, or no?
That was actually quite funny because people told me he was doing that. People told me he had some issues in the beginning because I guess what he didn't realize is WSOP software is, whatever, that like he's covering his cards, but like right here, it says your hand rank. So it'll say like aces. right? And then you see the board is like A6 deuce. You're like, dude, we like it actually. And it was really funny because one of the hands, someone showed me this. The board was like Jack 10, 10, like 3-4, right? I check raise turn and I, went all in on the river and he tanked and then he folded, right? And he's like, oh, like big laydown. He said something like, 3-10s is no good there, or something like referencing the idea they had 3-10s. But in the corner, you can see it said Jacks and 10s.
Nice execution.
You're doing terrific.
He sort of got busted for like saying, maybe hit 3-10s when it's like, we know you had Jacks and 10s.
It's good to know that even at the very highest levels of poker, people will still lie about their hand when they have nothing to gain. Because I've just thought that happened in $1,000 buy-in WSOP events where people are like, yeah, I folded 2 pair there. And then like,
oh, he has something to gain.
Because
he has absolutely. Daniel thinks he folded trips. That's a huge gain there for him.
No.
Daniel's
never thinking he folds trips there.
Was Jackson 10s any good, Daniel?
Oh, you know what, Adam? I don't remember.
Oh, man.
I love it.
Yeah,
all right.
Lawsuit.
Yeah, no kidding. Let's move on. Last week or a week and a bit ago, I think there was a pretty serious attack on a bunch of poker players and their Venmo accounts, not the least of which Daniel had his Venmo account cleaned out.
I think I was first.
Yeah.
I was first, then Eric, then Vanessa, yeah.
So yeah, Venmo account, I think what'd you lose, 15,000 or something? Significant.
Well, they took out, so what they did was, I noticed it real quickly, and Venmo has I think a policy of $3,000 transfers per day, max. And so the guy did 3 days in a row where he withdrew $29.95, $29.96. And also, and this was the funny part to me, is this guy just robbed me for all this money and still tried to use the fucking card for a $43 Uber, right? I mean, you're not happy enough. And then I was really confused as to what happened because I reached out to customer service or whatever. And then in my Venmo account, there was another Venmo account that I had access to, but I couldn't use it. It was like DNS photo or something. And there's 9,000 in that account. My account has 0, empty, right? So I guess what they did was to freeze the account, they transferred it to this other one. But I think it was a data leak on their end because the password I used there was completely independent of anything else. And so it had to be some sort of data leak. I will say to their credit, took a little bit, but they asked me for ID, this type of thing. And they said, can you point us to the transactions that were, that were not you? And I sent them all the ones that were not me, which were the Uber drive and everything like that. And they made good on all the money as well as
wow,
$50 Uber ride.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. I wonder if they can get any information from the Uber ride.
I don't know, but that was ballsy to me. I'm like, okay, so you just cleaned me out for $15K, but that wasn't enough. You're actually trying to get me for $43 more for an Uber.
So they got Eric Seidel, Vanessa Salpst, I believe, also. Looked like they were sort of a coordinated attack on the poker community because
I also was a real estate agent guy, and his account got.
Yeah. So if you have a Venmo account and you have any kind of significant amount of money in there, be really, really careful about how you firewall that thing. And I think Vanessa was talking about the fact that they don't even have two-factor authorization, which is crazy in this day and age.
I believe that they do. You have to figure it out and turn it on. I'm really bad with that shit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. The 2020 Poker Hall of Fame inductees are going to be announced either the end of December, I believe, before the final table of the World Series of Poker main event, the 10K buy-in hybrid that's both at GG Poker, WSCB.com, and live at the Rio. So Terrence and I sort of have a little bit of a different opinion in the Poker Hall of Fame, I'm sure, than a lot of people. We kind of shrug our shoulders every year.
Oh, we have a different opinion from the rest. I thought we were aligned. You and me are.
Oh no, of the poker world, we sort of have this bit of a disdain for it. Well, I think one of the main reasons, and Daniel, I'm sure, agrees with this, is the fact that Isai isn't in the Poker Hall of Fame, and for whatever political reason that the WSOP.com has decided not to induct somebody who's clearly the most deserving candidate for quite some time. Kind of just makes you go, who cares about this thing?
So Ty Stewart, I read an interview with Ty Stewart where he's like, this was a long time ago. I don't remember what year it was, but it's like, we can't have Isai in the Hall of Fame because he can't come to America to accept his award because and I'm like, you guys induct dead people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. I really want to point out the worst take ever. Jessica Wellman has some obscure take sometimes. This was the worst take of all time, because she basically quoted a piece about Isai Scheinberg and saying, all you people that are touting, Isai being in the Hall of Fame, maybe you should reference this criminal activity that he was, associated with poker, and how he's hurt the game and made it harder for legislation. It was the most cockamamie bullshit I've ever seen. So I actually just replied with a picture of Debbie Downer, like this, like to think, because here's the thing, right? Isai, first of all, was responsible for making good on so many people's Full Tilt account that, they didn't get reimbursed. And so what was his crime? What was the crime? He didn't do any jail time. It was a $25,000 fine. And if you want to play the morality game of Doyle and Amarillo Slim got arrested for playing in private games. When I was a teenager, I played in a private underground club, and cops came, and I got a ticket, and I had to go to court and all that stuff. So I was involved in illegal gaming, because it was in a poker room that I shouldn't have been in because it was a private game. Like, it's so fucking cockamamie and ridiculous to take that position. And this idea, and this holds true with a whole bunch of things. So many people in the poker community, for lack of a better term, are just fucking stupid. Okay, and this is one area that I think they're stupid. When they think of regulation, like, if that happens, we're never going to get regulation in the U.S. As though these politicians and legislators are like perusing Twitter to see what the latest poker Twitter drama is between Doug Polk and frickin' Dole Brunson or some shit like that. They don't give a fuck. This isn't a thing. I know it sounds good in theory, the idea that if we show our best face and we, put on a smile, then poker will be accepted and blah, blah, blah. It's just complete hogwash, total asinine bullshit. It's not how it works. If their legislators think it makes financial sense for them, like they do with sports betting, they will do it. Period. It wouldn't matter if you farted on I don't know, I was going to go with some dumb analogy, but yeah, and Brand.
Well, I think I just want to quickly, I know Terrence probably has some thoughts, but just to rebut a little bit, I think, and I don't want to pretend to speak for Jess Wellman about why she, took that stance. I read that article as well. But I think the one thing, and Isai did, believe me, there's nobody a bigger fan of Isai than myself. I know you guys are too. I think he deserved to be in there ages ago. But I think the one thing that people have a hard time, and people have different thresholds about what they find is acceptable, right? And when you buy a bank and recode financial transactions as golf balls when they're not golf balls or whatever, that kind of thing is a step too far for people. For me, no, it's a victimless crime. And, I don't think Isai did so many other things that more than offset it, but I can see why some people kind of get stuck on something like that. And I'm sure Terrence has some comments too.
Yeah, I mean, the Jess thing, I don't want to do it. I responded to her. I was one of the very first people. I saw that at the top of my feed. It was 1 minute old when I quote tweeted her, and she got torched a lot for this. So, I feel like at this point, we're getting me at 15 yards for piling on. But, I wrote, in quoting her tweet that this is a man who grew more to grow the game than literally any human being that's alive right now, in my opinion. If you talk about the number of people that he got playing poker, it's hard to say that there's anybody alive right now that has more. I mean,
it's not close. By the way, it's not even close. Who would be a distant second?
Whole entire countries are playing poker because of him. Entire countries are playing poker because of him. And so, and just the fact that, as Daniel pointed out, he got no jail time for this so-called criminal conviction that Jess points out. But Jess got torched by the poker community. It almost got to the point where by the afternoon, I started to feel bad for her. But say stupid things and get win stupid prizes as it goes. It's a bad take on Jess's part. Going back to what you had said, I mean, you and I, Adam, have been advocating for Isai in the Hall of Fame for as long as we've had a poker podcast together, for all of these reasons, because he's the man who grew the game. He was a philanthropist. I don't know if you guys even remember all the when Thailand had earthquakes and Indonesia earthquakes and the Japan earthquakes and I believe Puerto Rico as well. There was so much fundraising that happened for a company that was, big, but not as big as a lot of the much bigger companies out there are doing it. And you can't find somebody who it's very hard to find people who actually work with him who have negative things to say about him. I mean, there's a man who behaved ethically. He treated his employees very well. He made a fuck ton of money doing it. He introduced people to the game. Like, there's what can you possibly say that's negative? And that you and I considered the Hall of Fame a joke until he's inducted. And I hope to God that this is the year. I mean, I hope to God that this year, and then, you know, Daniel's obviously one of the people who's already in the Poker Hall of Fame. They changed the voting this year, but they changed it back so that I think only people in the Hall of Fame get a vote right now again.
I think that's true. I hope that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, so Daniel obviously has one of those votes, and he has a lot of influence among the other people who are in there, and we'll see how this shakes out. I hope this is because it's just not a legitimate Hall of Fame without him, in my opinion. It's just point blank. I can't take it.
I will say, to speak negatively about the Hall of Fame even more so, there's no question that there is an anti-Europe and anti-rest of world bias. It is kind of ridiculous and absurd that there are so few members in the Poker Hall of Fame that are not born and raised in the United States of America. Like, poker has grown all across the world in Europe, and there's plenty of people at the forefront of helping do that. But because they're not they don't live here, they're not in the same circles. Like, if we really want to have a true Hall of Fame that represents the whole world, then we really need to do a better job of making sure that more players from Europe, like the Bruno Fatusis and the Chris Bjorns, and of course, even a guy like Devilfish, who now is in the Hall of Fame. Thor Hansen got in recently, but there's a whole bunch of names like Donica O'Day. There's a whole bunch of names I didn't mention. I just think that they're a neglected group in a big way, and I don't want it to be an old boys club, if you will. A lot of people.
Yeah, but they're neglected because of the way it's set up for the voting, right? Like, Doyle goes around campaigning for his buddies from the Texas Road days and stuff like that. So that's who gets inducted in, because Doyle's gone out.
Yeah, but not quite, because the first part of it's a little flawed in that the nomination process is like sort of among fans, right? So kind of like fans can just say who they want in there with but the problem with that is so many people that are poker fans today that would vote, they don't even know who Miami John Cernuto is, who John Benetti, like these types of people who were big names. So that's where Doyle would voice his opinion on that stuff, but he has nothing to do with the nomination process. Once the nominees are out, you're absolutely right that he's going to talk to his people and say, I think we should, but I don't think it's this sort of how do I describe it? It's not this kind of it's not like alliances where it's everyone actually discusses. Every year I always ask Eric Seidel and Jennifer, now that she's in there, who do you like this year? Who do you think deserves it? We just discuss it amongst each other, but we all ultimately, vote the way that we want, that we choose to. It was more difficult when you have a large presence of media figures who vote based on a very different criteria in a lot of ways. They vote for the big name, obviously someone who's, they see as a good guy or whatever reasons they're voting. And for me, the purity of the Poker Hall of Fame should be, if we don't like the criteria, which I don't, I think we can, but I'm going to vote based on the actual criteria always, right? I don't care how nice you are. I don't care if you were a dick. I don't care what you acted like. That has nothing to do with your stats as a player. Nobody looks at a baseball player going to the Hall of Fame and say, he batted 400, hit 84 home runs, but he was a real dick. It's not how it works.
Hey, I mean, Barry Bonds isn't in the Hall of Fame. He was kind of
that's the thing. There's a difference between a Hall of Fame and a Hall of Merit, and it's sort of an interesting thing. Is I think we're all sort of sports purists, and I think we would like a Hall of Merit, and I think especially Daniel, because he has played high stakes against so many of the guys who are in there, that you're oh, well, this guy's a slam dunk Hall of Famer because man, every time I played against him, he kicked my ass. He's super tough in all the games, or she's super tough in all the games. And, on the other hand, this guy got all the TV coverage, but, really he sucks. And so this is a thing that does happen. I mean, I think there is a thing in baseball. I mean, I don't know anything really about baseball, but I'm sure, as Ross points out, there are a lot of people who deserve to be in the Hall of Fame just on their skill level, but they're not because they're not popular enough in some ways. Whereas there's probably some guys who weren't that great, but were really marketable and big. And because in some ways it is the word fame in there. It's, I would like to see it be the Hall of Merit, but it really is the Hall of Fame.
You're right about one thing. The fact that it's called the Hall of Fame, this was one of the arguments from some of the people in the media who said, it's called the Hall of Fame. And they were talking about specifically Chris Moneymaker when he was inducted. They're well, who's more famous than Chris Moneymaker? And, a bigger part of the boom. And you can't deny that. If you're basing it on who's the most famous, then that's one thing. But if you're basing it on merit as a player, I thought Moneymaker there was a decent case for him in the builder category for just sparking the boom. But as a player, like, and I don't think he doesn't take any disrespect to this, because like he doesn't have like a Hall of Fame resume as a poker player, right? He gets in as a builder, but I mean, come on, there's plenty of people that have played high stakes and the like. So yeah, I mean, I guess when you have an ambiguous definition of what Hall of Fame and the word fame means, then you get disagreements in terms of who should and shouldn't get in. But again, I'm cool with it. Like, listen, it's an honor. It's kind of silly in a bigger picture. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's just a nice gesture, nice thing. So anytime someone gets in, I'm happy for it.
Some of the guys that have been nominated over the years that didn't get in, Mattisau, Chris Bjorn, Eli Lesra, Antonio Esfandiari, Max Pescatori, Humberto Brenes. So, you look for...
Didn't you get like David Chu up for like the 15th time or something like that?
Oh, yeah. And then others, Matt Savage, Huxley.
Yeah, Matt Savage has been nominated like way too many times, not again. It's a shame that I think they're only letting one in this year, because obviously, like, we make this very strong case for each side, but like Matt Savage has also been screwed over in this thing over and over, I think.
A superb choice.
Just to finish up, Huxley, Bruno Fatoussi, to Daniel's point about international players, Ted Forrest, of course, a longtime poker player. Chris Ferguson would be an interesting discussion. But the problem there is we don't really know what happened. We don't have a thorough understanding until the book comes out.
Holy shit! Imagine the world if Chris Ferguson gets in and Eastside doesn't. Holy shit!
That'd be 2020.
For much as I'll say this: Howard Lederer, Annie Duke, Chris Ferguson, whoever they are, right? Like, I would not base my personal opinion of them or stuff like that on whether or not I thought they were worthy of the Hall of Fame. If I actually thought that Howard, for example, had a Hall of Fame career worthy of being inducted, I would be okay with it. I mean, I would be okay with entertaining the idea,
right?
Because, like you said, a lot of it's ambiguous in terms of like we don't know like exactly what happened. We know bad shit happened, but I like I said, I like to focus on, did they have a resume worthy of a Hall of Fame, less so about business and stuff like that.
But if it's the Hall of Fame, 10 years from now, does Dan Bilzerian go in? I mean,
we'll get there. But Chris Ferguson probably does, right? I mean, he's got a pretty good case.
His resume is strong enough for
his
sure.
His resume is fantastic.
Yeah,
but we don't know how much damage he was actually doing to the poker community at Full Tilt Poker.
You just say, I mean, this is the thing. It's like specifically contrasting it against Eastside, right? Like, because this whole thing was like, oh, Eastside, he was whatever, he broke the law, like he violated UIGA and he ignored it, and it's like, I mean, yeah, and he did good for the game. There's no question. He was like unambiguously good for the game. And so if you're going to contrast this with like Chris Ferguson, who may be like an innocent bystander in this thing, but like there's a good chance at the very worst he could have been a whistleblower when he wasn't. Like that's probably the most generous interpretation that we can come up with. Like, holy shit.
But here's the thing. The comparison's actually just bad in a way, because Esai is clearly being considered based on one criteria, builder, right? He meets the criteria as a builder, right? Chris Ferguson is not being inducted based on a builder. He would be based on on his playing thing. And in that section, as a player, it says nothing about the growth of the game or what he did or the positive impact. It has nothing to do with how good of a bad person you are, right? That's only true if you read it clearly, whether you're being inducted in the builder category. So obviously Chris Ferguson would not be inducted based on the builder category for his transgressions. But if his career as a poker player is worthy of Hall of Fame, then I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, and of all the sports Hall of Fames, it's interesting, right? The LPGA one, I believe, off the top of my head, is the one that's very defined on career stats, career milestones, rather than, popularity or, builder, that kind of stuff. It's very, very defined. And we don't have that in poker, until what we were talking about earlier, how it's sort of a popularity contest after the nominations are done, right? So somebody like Chris Ferguson probably doesn't have a very good chance because, the way it's discussed after the nominations, if he is nominated, he's probably not going to have a lot of buddies that are going to go to bat for him. So that's sort of where, and hopefully Eastside does have a lot of people that will go to bat for him. All right, let's move on. The big story of poker Twitter this week. I know some people probably tuning in and are going to skip to this part because it's quite an interesting development. GG Poker signed Dan Bilzerian. This is Instagram superstar. I won't say poker superstar. Dan Bilzerian as a brand ambassador at GG Poker. Bilzerian joins, of course, Daniel, our co-host, and Feder Holtz, Elke, Felipe Ramos as the primary ambassadors of the brand, and Gigi called him a brand ambassador. So he's got 32 million followers, as I mentioned on Instagram. So as far as trying to monetize those followers and his sort of Instagram profile and his social media profile, just on a sort of a financial basis alone, you could say, well, that's a home run, because he's got a lot of influence over a great amount of people that have disposable income, that are predisposed to, signing up to a poker site and depositing $500 or whatever. It's interesting, right? And I've noticed some of these attempts to monetize social media followings, they don't really have a super long lifespan, right? Because it's sort of it's just economics, right? It's a diminishing returns after at some point for a poker site or an entity to continue to pay somebody after you've mined sort of their value, as far as, getting a whole bunch of promotions and getting people, as many people, the low-hanging fruit, to come over and play. So it'll be interesting to see how long this goes. So short term, is it a really good move for GG Poker financially? It seems like it. It seems like they can absolutely get a lot of those people to come over and play. The demographic looks perfect for it. But does that mean it's a good idea? So, obviously there's a lot of controversial stuff that comes along with having sort of brand rub, so to speak, with somebody like Dan Bilzerian at GG Poker. And, he's pretty much a self-admitted misogynist. Like, there's all kinds of sort of issues with his behavior, the way he treats people, the way he talks to people, that kind of stuff. And when GG Poker calls him a brand ambassador, that sort of implies that we align with his sort of brand. And difficult spot, I know, for Daniel, for sure. I mean, you might. Okay, so there you go. Give us your thoughts.
No, not difficult at all. But yeah, you brought up some very good points. First and foremost, about diminishing returns. Like, that's why partly you see guys like Kevin Hart and Ronaldo and the other sort of celebs that have come in for a short period of time. You get their followers engaged. But I think specifically with Dan Bilzerian, and I was saying this well before he signed with GG. I had this discussion before I was with them. I thought this is exactly the kind of guy you want bringing in people, because I think of the following and the fan base that he has, and I'm not seeing like GTO wizards who are going to have like a real deep understanding of the game, right? So here's the thing. Here's the rub, and I said this last night in my post game. We always talk in poker about bringing in new people, bring in fresh money, right? And we've exhausted a lot of different ways to do that in terms of an industry, right? This is a new one where, of course, it's controversial. Obviously, women can hate him, and I don't expect anyone to like Dan Bilzerian, right? I don't agree with him on literally anything politically, right? I see him as a troll because it's kind of what he is. Like, he does things specifically and purposely to trigger people that gain attention, right? Like, recently we saw the tweet where Vanessa Cade came at him, and so this is the thing people miss. Vanessa Cade, totally her prerogative and right, and we're not going to debate whether it's true or not, called him like a sleazy, toxic, sexist tool, right? So she said that, and then he said, quiet hoe, nobody knows who you are, right? Offensive, sure, but what did you expect from a guy like Dan Bilzerian when you called him what you did? Like, did you expect him to be like, thank you so much for the feedback, I will do better on trying to be a more whole, you human being, right? So he knows what he's doing when he does that. He's just trying to trigger people and make people crazy, right? That's just kind of his thing, right? So then the question is, like you said, is that dangerous for any brand? Can be, potentially. Do you alienate enough people that it makes it an overall negative? I look at it this way. If you hate Dan Bilzerian, right, and you can't stand this fucking guy, well, come take his money. Come bust him and all the fools that he's going to bring, to the game that you should be able to fleece, and tap into that market of like suckers. Like, I feel like poker is not knitting, and it isn't. Like, we always try, there's always this push to make it this clean, and but this is a degen fest. It's fucking gambling. As much as we want to call poker this, pure, profession, I mean, it's seedy, and Dan is that guy, and Dan is unapologetically Dan, right? Love him or hate him, like I said, I don't agree with literally anything he says politically, But I do appreciate the fact that he actually says the things he believes, as much as I disagree with him on so many of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, you could say a lot of these same things about like Trump, who I know is somebody that you dislike, and it's like this sort of like, oh, he calls him as he sees him, kind of this stuff, and it's like whatever. With respect, yeah, I don't think, and I think it's I think it's wrong to say like, oh, like it's okay, it's fine for him to say like obnoxious things to Vanessa Cade because it's on brand for him. Like that's, it's like Vanessa Cade, like I don't know her really. I don't know her, but like I don't, but this is somebody who I think in 2020 represents kind of part of the aspirational model of poker. She's a streamer. She's trying to make it as pro. I don't think she plays super high stakes, but she's trying to make it as a pro and travel and gain a following. And she's not a big superstar or anything, but she's working hard and she's out there battling in the streets. I think that's fine. Like for Bilzerian to just go to call her a hoe and say nobody knows who you are on the first day of his signing, to just like somebody who seems to be like a hard working woman in poker trying to make it. To me, it says something. I mean, it's literally like all he tweeted yesterday. He didn't even retweet the GG Poker announcement that he was signed, as far as I know. And whatever, that's part of his contract. I just don't get how this guy's a good ambassador for the game.
I hate that. I forgot to add that one thing. I actually fucking detest the word ambassador. I think it's just really stupid because I think it has this this idea that you're supposed to be this like beacon of a role model or whatever. But like I don't think of myself an ambassador. I truly don't, and I certainly don't think of his as an ambassador. I get the brand ambassador thing in that if you want to use the language by saying someone who promotes this specific brand, then it's accurate. But as far as being like some steward of goodness, I wouldn't have called him an ambassador personally.
Yeah, fair.
I'll say that I think it was a really not a good move by GG for a few reasons. But the biggest one is, and we've talked about it for a long time, is that the biggest market untapped in poker, and it's remained this way. We just haven't, for whatever reason, and you could talk about the game doesn't lend itself to women don't take to it or something, whatever the reason is, but we haven't been able to bring women to poker. And when you look at, but GG doesn't have any women as ambassadors, right? So if you go sign fill in the blank of a high profile female ambassador to go out and try and reach that female market, well, this is the opposite, right? This is going to turn off probably some women that are playing on GG and some that might sign up in the future to not sign up in the future.
And also, the opposite of that is true, right? Because he does bring with him, and I was going to tweet this, but I know I get fucking grilled for it, so I won't even say it. But like, he is always surrounded by a bunch of, literally by a bunch of women, like 20, 30 women.
Yeah, but he pays them to be there.
Right, but here's the thing. They're not being held captive. They're there because they choose to be, either A, because they want to party and they want to do whatever, or B, because he's paying them to do so, right? So I said this earlier, and it was kind of joking, but I'm serious. Like, true feminism is letting women choose, how to make their money. And sex working has been around since like the 1800s, the oldest profession in the book, right? So some women will be turned off by it, no question. Many men will be turned off by it too. But like, ultimately, I would hope that they would see past like, the absurdity of the character, if you will, and just... my God. And just like look at their bottom line. If they're the goal when you play poker is to try to play with a bunch of suckers, right? And I do believe that, having him promote certain things or whatever has already shown to, and will continue to do that. And I think that the difficult thing is like actually Doug Polk said this, and I was surprised because I really kind of agreed with him. He's like, who cares? Like, do we give a shit? Like, he's a brand.
But some people do care, right? That's the thing.
I think it's short-sighted, right? Because I think it's like, they're not trying to win the woke awards, or like the woke Olympics or whatever, right?
I'm sorry, like, but this isn't about like wokeness, right? Like, I don't think it is. Like I do not consider myself a woke person. I don't get offended by shit all the time, but I think Bilzerian is like the literal example of toxic masculinity. And I say that as somebody who does not think that masculinity is inherently toxic. I mean, you look at me, who am I when you think of Terrence Chen? It's like a guy who gambles and fights. I like hunting. I eat steak rare. I am this is the thing. I don't think being a man is bad, but I do think that his brand, the way he does it, is like objectifying women. He has a history of assaulting women physically. Okay, like this isn't wokeness. This isn't political correctness. He objectifies women and has physically assaulted them. In my opinion, like all the people are gonna come out there and say like, oh, who's this fucking cuck or virgin or whatever they want to call me. But as far as I'm concerned, fucking Dan Bilzerian is not a man. Real men don't treat women like shit. Adam, you have a daughter. You like I have a daughter. Like Daniel, I'm sure one day you will too. You would not want your daughter or your sister or your mother or anyone fucking female that you know remotely associated with this guy. So why in the hell do you want him to be one of the faces of your business? Like the man is disgusting. And you can turn around and say like, okay, this is why we paid him, because we're building and we're talking about it and it's great controversy and there's no such thing as bad press. But like I've had Dan Bilzerian, I actually had to unblock Dan Bilzerian for like 3 days just because I can't follow this conversation otherwise. But now he's blocked again. He hasn't tweeted about GG Poker. He hasn't done an Instagram about tweeting. Where is the value that this guy's going to provide compared to all the women and men who are absolutely just disgusted by this? I don't see the value. I'm sorry. And it's, as Adam mentioned, it's already been hard enough to bring women into poker. And whether it matters, like I know they're not trying to bring in women with Daniel Bilzerian. They're trying to bring in, as you pointed out, like rich people with more money than brains, which is the kind of people that Dan Bilzerian has been able to play poker with. Like, good for him. I think you said something very relevant, which is like a big part of being a poker player is playing with people who are worse than you for high stakes. Dan Bilzerian's got the market fucking cornered on that. Good for him. Fantastic. I just don't see like where the value of this comes at the expense of turning this many people off. And even if it does, like, I just don't think it's worth it for the game. I just think it's bad for the game.
And that's totally fair. And that's like ultimately, like I said, I mean, I don't expect people to like Dan Bilzerian or everyone to agree with the idea of like, you know, him being a beacon for bringing in more people in the game. But I will say that like, since I've been in the game since the late 90s, the percentage of women that play poker has roughly been in the 5 to 7% range. Like, say, if you look at tournament averages for a very long time, right? There's been a lot of different endeavors or whatever, or attempts to try to, expand that or change that or tap into a market. And there's never really been anything that's done that. Now, obviously, I don't think signing Dan Bilzerian is going to expand that necessarily, but I question and I guess I challenge whether or not it will have the effect in a negative way. Because I ultimately think this: people play where the best games are, right? So if you bring in weak players that are losing a lot of money, like Jennifer Harmon, because we talk about this, because Jennifer, she's old school, and so is my wife. She doesn't care about this kind of shit. Like, Jennifer grew up playing at a time, and I'm not saying this is what we need to go back to or whatever, but she was able to look past the misogyny, drilled at her and all this kind of shit, and laugh it off because these suckers were drunk and acting like idiots and giving her all their money, right? So she was able to look past it. And I'm not suggesting that people should today, right? But I would say that, like, it's an opportunity too, if you choose to. Like, look, like, this guy's a dick, an asshole, whatever. Okay, just take his money. You can block him on the chat. You don't have to see anything, but like, just take his money.
Yeah, I'll say that you probably don't hear, and Jennifer is, an incredibly strong-willed person and can put up with a lot of stuff that, maybe a lot of people can. And you don't hear from maybe the girl that tried to go play in 1530 game at the Commerce or whatever for some period of time and was, subjected to all kinds of sexist remarks for a long time and left the game. Like, she's moved on with her life and did something else, right? So totally, yeah.
And sort of even beyond that, this sort of idea, like Dan Bilzerian, obviously, like, tremendously wealthy, plays at super high stakes. It's not as simple as like, oh, if you don't like him, go play with him. And it's true. Like, I played, when I was a grinder, I played with all kinds of people that I would not want within 50 feet of me outside of a poker context because they were sending money my way by being really bad at poker. And so I just shut up and I shut my mouth and I took their money. And that's what your job is as a professional poker player. But we're not going to, unless you manage to get in some nosebleed game and you're like a super high stakes killer, like I'm also under the impression that Dan Bilzerian, like, he's probably not that good, but he's probably not like complete shit.
But you're gonna get the money that he brings, right? The people that he brings.
I don't mean specifically Dan Bilzerian playing with him, but I meant like the people that he will bring in, like, obviously, like, the lifestyle that he sells and all the caricature bullshit craziness that he does, right? Like, the type of people that are really interested in that. Like, if you think of, and maybe this is stereotyping, like, I don't think of this crew as being the crew that is going to come in and like be online crushers. I think they're going to be the right kind of players. And here's the thing. we've talked many times about the ecosystem and how important that is for an online for an online environment or for a live environment, right? If you don't have contributors and you don't have new depositors, you got nothing, and you always have to find new and innovative ways. So was it a risk to go this route? Absolutely. Could it backfire? No question about it. Are people going to be upset? Absolutely. In the end, the company felt like it was a risk worth taking. And so far, obviously there's been people that are not happy with it. But ultimately, I think it'll take some time to see whether or not it pans out as something that does what it's supposed to do.
All right, let's move on. We got some voicemails, Roscoe.
Sure. I mean, you ready?
Tweets first. Oh wait!
Tweets. Yeah. Sorry, I missed tweets. Let's go tweets. Going surfing on the internet. Okay, so there are some tweets. We've talked about Dan Bilzerian, so we won't do those ones. Who's is Spraggy?
Who put him up there? Whoever put him up there should read him.
I put him up there, but we talked about it. I mean, Dan is a toxic person with Twitter. Daniel mentioned that he called Vanessa Kate a hoe. He's talking about race. I think his Twitter.
He spelled wrong. He fucking spelled hoe like a gardening tool. HOE. Which is almost like, I mean, that's the funniest part of the tweet. The fact that he missed
also, COVID is a hoax.
Yeah, COVID's a hoax. It's okay to be racist if you're black. I mean, he obviously very, very toxic on social media, and this is what sort of my problem and others' problems with this. But who's is the other one? Terrence, is that you?
That was me. I got at Spraggy. Big day for me. I'm no longer the worst poker player sponsored by a major poker room.
He's funny. He has like a really good self-deprecation sense of humor. I think his tweets are awesome.
All the Brits are great. I just want how have you ever actually played poker with him? Like, I mean, there's a lot of discussion. He's probably, he's obviously not going to be like a high-level pro, but do you have any sense of his skill level?
I have a sense because I know people who are friendly with him and, travel in the similar circles or whatever. And here's the thing, like a lot of people, they say, well, he's not even a winning player. I'm like, he's actually won more money playing poker than 99.9% of poker players who are professional, right? He's done so not because he's better, right? But that's sort of, begs the question of like what makes someone good. He plays with people he basically plays with blind people. He plays with a bunch of suckers. So if you're like half decent, like Terrence, you would destroy the games that he's in. You know what I mean? Like you'd be the best player in the game by far, and you'd win easy. So he just happens to play in really good games, and he's played in like ridiculously high games. Like it's a rumor, but it's true. Like he won $50 million in a session. That's a lot of fucking money. Now, is it also true that he had money inherited and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't know how much of his empire was from poker or whatever, but there's no question that he's made a shit ton of money playing poker. And this doesn't say anything. It's not like he's going to go in there and beat Christoph Vogelsang. You know what I mean? Like those guys would crush him. He knows that. He's not stupid in that regard. Anyway.
Those guys, I mean, it might be those guys who are actually the real beneficiaries, like these guys who can, have the bank, the Christoph Vogelsangs of the world, the real high stakes pros. They might be the guy who really benefits from this.
The end bosses, right? After the money trickles upwards in poker, as always, right? So
the end bosses always get the money in the end somehow. That's why they're called end bosses.
All right, let's move on to some voicemails.
All right, we can try this out.
Email number 1.
Well, hey, I was hoping this was the DAT Poker Podcast hotline. I was calling to say that I love the show. I did want to mention that it's funny to hear Daniel Negreanu laugh at Trump and policies and stuff, like he knows something. Daniel, you got to really realize that you're not even a peanut on a piece of shit of Donald Trump. I mean, he's accomplished so much in his life, and you've done nothing but take money from suckers and learn to play one game and get an endorsement. So step back, man. Take a little piece of reality. You're good at one thing.
I have a very good brain, and I've said a lot of things.
Children, they'll be nothing. They'll be broke. But if you look at the Trump organization and what they've done, and their children and how educated and smart they are, it's just amazing. Because again, like if I were to go and piss into the beach off the coast of Santa Barbara, then that's about how significant.
We have more enthusiasm than maybe anybody.
Dilution that it would take. But anyway, hope you'll step back, take a little piece of reality, man. Have a good day.
Hey, dude, speaking of reality, tell this fucking lunatic QAnon is a hell of a drug, you fucking wacko. How about that? Eat some of that, you fucking wacko.
I'll tell you what, that is my favorite voicemail of all time.
That's why maybe we should have these. I'm always worried when Ross doesn't get a chance to look at the voicemails first. This time it paid off.
QAnon crackpot right there.
I gotta say, I mean, the Donald Trump has accomplished so much. I mean, like on the.
Oh, don't even argue. You can't. Don't even go down this road.
Less than Dan Bilzerian.
Let's not even go down this. All right. That is so good. Thanks for calling. Pull back, by the way.
Like fucking Jeff Madsen's buddy or something like that.
Yeah. It sounded legit for the first 30 seconds, but
no, call back. I want more. Get it. That's not enough. Let's hear.
We have his number. Should we call him?
He's not going to have a lot more than that.
We'll probably find him on 4chan or some fucking crazy message board, waiting for the next QAnon revelation and fucking conspiracy theory.
All right. I won't block him yet. We'll see if he comes back.
No.
All right, here we go. Wait, number 2 unedited? I don't know.
Yes, let's go.
Email number 2.
Hi guys, this is Paul from Connecticut. Big fan of the show.
Paul sounds
I guess I have a comment and a question. I'm enjoying the Daniel versus Doug match like everyone. I watch every night basically, or every time you play. Everyone has their own opinion on who the poker goat might be. A lot of people would probably say Ivy. I think Daniel's already in the mix, but I've heard someone say that if he wins this match against Polk, beating probably the best online heads-up player in the world, or one of them, and he beats him at his own game, that would kind of elevate his status more, and I guess I would love to hear your opinion on that. But also my question is there a likelihood, or how likely is it that your coaches may become public knowledge at some point? I'd love to know who's helping you. Obviously, you can't do it during the challenge, but maybe when the challenge is over, they'll become public, and it might be up to them. You might say that, but maybe would one of them come public? I'm curious if it's people I know or if it's just some online GTO wizards that no one knows about. So keep up the good work. Okay, bye.
So I want to change this a little bit. I want to say, do you guys think the poker goat is somebody, the actual poker goat, is somebody that nobody knows or barely knows, or you might have barely heard of him? Like, is there any chance of that?
I think there's precisely zero chance of that in terms of my definition, because poker is not just no limit hold'em, right? Because some could argue that OTB Baron, Red Baron, who nobody knows who it is was the GOAT 6-max, guy. And now, like, in terms of heads up, I think a guy like Linus Love would be potentially that. But, like, they play one game. When I think of poker, I think of GOAT. I think of Phil Ivey. So I think of a guy who mastered all the games, who you could throw in a new game, change the rules, and, he'll be at the forefront of figuring it out faster than everybody else, and adapting really, really quickly. So for me, he's the GOAT. As far as my coaches, to answer that part of the question, I think that, probably near the end of the challenge or maybe after that, we can go over that. Maybe we'll, have them in the forefront and kind of discuss the strategy. Hopefully it will be a proud one for them, whether we win or lose. Obviously we'd like to win, but if we don't, we took my game from like 0 to 60, which I know is already true, because I think their methods of teaching are like cutting edge, frankly. I think that the way in which they structure the lesson plans and everything like that is like the best thing you could get. So yeah, I think when this is all over, hopefully I can do them proud and sneak out a victory here, and give them all the accolades and the credit they deserve.
I'm curious if you can say, like, what do they have some sort of incentive for you winning? Is there like a bonus per se?
I would say they have bets as well, I would imagine. And I would say that, their incentive is like they have other clients as well, right? And they have clients who they work with. So, I think people seeing the evidence of me going from where I was on day one to the end of the challenge, it's a good, testimonial to the work that they do in terms of how they, how effective they are, in terms of teaching the game in a way that you can learn it. I'm obviously a different kind of student. Like, I'm not like a student you just from some random guy off the street who's like, all right. But in some ways, a lot of the ways in which they were teaching me, I was a complete noob because I never thought about poker from that perspective. The idea of game theory or game theory optimal just seemed like for most of my career, and it was bad, it was not good, right? Because game theory optimal, is an effective strategy, but if you can exploit your opponent's mistakes and they make bigger ones, a better strategy is to exploit and not be exploited yourself, right? So my 20 years of my poker career was always focused on taking advantage of the clear mistakes that people make, and not playing GTO myself. For example, right? Extreme example. If you played heads up and, your opponent folded way too much, right? And never adjusted, you could raise every hand and then fold when they re-raise because they're too tight, right?
People in general are really afraid of me.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that would print, right? Obviously, that's a very simplistic, version, but that would be the exploit. If someone's overfolding and they're folding too much heads up, then you just, like, say, for example, someone had a VPIP of like 20 playing heads up, which it should be, much, much higher than that. Well, against that player, you could literally just open every hand, and then whenever they show any resistance, you could literally fold unless you flop the fucking nuts, and you're going to win money. You're going to beat the person without even doing anything other than just raising before the flop.
So limit hold'em in the 2000s is what you're talking about.
Ish, yeah. Like when people were folding their big blind, you got to get in there with the best hand, and they're folding like, 8-9 suited because you raised under the gun. Like, okay, good luck with that strategy.
T, who's the poker GOAT?
I think it's a hard game to have a GOAT in. I mean, it definitely seems like it's hard to make a case against Ivy, and even Doyle for the same reasons as Daniel said. And a skill at all the games, like over so many years. Obviously Doyle's not the favorite in the games that he plays in with now, but I think he's probably fine with that. I think it's hard, right? Like when you've got other sports. You've got your baseball, basketball, hockey, football. You have so much that is known and quantified. You know how many yards the guy threw for, and how many goals the guy scored, and you even have these advanced stats to say like how many wins did he contribute for this team, and how would this team have been as good without him? I think in poker it's a lot harder because a lot of this occurs behind the scenes, right? So a lot of these are going to be in high stakes games that nobody's ever seen before. And nobody even has good records for. For as much as Daniel's played in all of these high stakes games for 20 plus years, Daniel doesn't know really how much people have won at poker. I mean, he probably keeps his own really good records, but you don't know how much other guys have won in that game and who's up and who's down. And Ted Forrest is up this much and Helmuth is down this much. Like, no, there's no idea. So it's and even that it's not even just about dollars and cents, because if it were, maybe Dan Bilzerian is the poker GOAT, because as Daniel pointed out, Dan Bilzerian has made a shit ton of money playing poker. So like, if that's the only metric we use, it's hard. It really depends what the yardstick is, right? Like if it's just money, then it's going to be the guys who are playing in the highest stakes and dominate, and they never play against the lineup that's tougher.
That was my point. Like maybe you've never heard of it. Maybe some Saudi Arabian sheik who's won. But you can't consider that person like the poker GOAT just because they played with the sheik, right? Like that would be like, I was thinking about this morning. There used to be an MMA fighter who was like 28-0, just fighting just the absolute shittiest fighters in the world. He got to the UFC and got like starched in like 40 seconds by Joe Lozon. Like that, if I went out there and just fought like bums off the street and beat 90 of them in a row, would I be the MMA GOAT? No. Because I would get my ass kicked by like the guys who are like presently elite in the UFC. So like you can't say that it's just the guy who's like.
Well, I guess the analogy I would use is like sports. Like the best baseball player would have to play Major League Baseball. The best hockey player would have to play in the NHL to know if you're the best, right? So if you're not playing against the best players in the world and beating them, then when it actually comes to go in terms of skill level, then you can't make that claim unless you actually do it.
Yeah, so there's no, and we've seen this with almost every great online poker player. At some point, they've gone live so that they could play like bigger stakes than were available, or they simply stopped getting action online, so they ended up playing like live. Like it's happened in the vast majority of cases. I think we had that era in like the mid 2000s and early, maybe even the early 2010s, where like the online players stayed online. But almost to a man, they've all come out at this point. And, they're playing in high stakes live, either cash games or tournaments, whatever their deal is.
Daniel, who would we be surprised that would be in your top 10 of poker GOATs? Like the biggest surprise that we would think of?
Wow, that's a really tough question. A surprise that would be in the, in my top 10. Like the first name that came to mind, I'm not sure. But I have Ray Decardani in there. When he's at his peak, I think he's super top notch.
Except when you're staking him, then.
What in the World Series events? No. No, I mean, he's the name that comes to mind. I think David Oppenheim is already in most people's top 10. But again, what I'm looking at is not like online no limit hold'em. I'm looking at, if they don't play mixed games, they don't qualify for me in my top 10.
All right, guys.
It's fortunate that sort of online poker has done this, that it's never had the ability to create really great mixed games players. I think it did in like the mid part of the 2000s, where you could play the mixed games online, and there were, like, for me, I had very little access, I think, to like the stud games if it wasn't for online poker, because I just wasn't about to travel to like Atlantic City to try to play 20-40 stud or whatever when I could sit at home and play 200-400 limit hold'em online. Like online poker has kind of hyper specialized everyone into like you said, like a 6 max NL specialist, a heads up NL specialist, a 9-headed PLO specialist. Everybody's specialized now in online poker, and it's unfortunate because I'm like you. I think like you and Daniel and Adam, you guys both like have a respect for the ability to play mixed games, and that just seems to be lost with this generation now, because everybody is kind of. I mean, there's a little bit. There's people who are really good at like no limit and PLO, and maybe like 6 plus, like short deck and no limit deuce, like, because those are all no limity games. But I wonder if you're starting to see a loss of a lot of these mixed game, and maybe like in 15 years we won't really have a lot of these, like we won't have a lot of this, like are there a lot of, in the last 5 years, players who have come up through online and really impressed in the mixed games?
Well, I mean, certainly guys like Timofey Kuznetsov, Jungle Man, Michael Thurman.
Jungle Man, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, but
Jungle Man is part of that, I think, that early generation that I was talking about. Jungle Man started playing poker in the 2000s.
Yeah, Timofey Kuznetsov, I'm not sure when he played, but he's a crusher at the highest levels. And
obviously him.
Sean Deeb started online too.
Yeah,
moved to mixed games, right? All right, so that's going to wrap it up.
Early generation.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to wrap it up for the show this week. Thanks everybody out there for tuning in. Thanks to you guys for getting together. Daniel, don't put on too much weight with the chips.
It's like the same thing when you tell your kids it's Halloween. Don't eat them all in one night.
Don't eat them all in one sitting. You'll get sick. And good. And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks to you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.